Podcasting from the heart of the Gator Nation in Alachua County, Florida, this is Extension Cord, the podcast of IFAS Extension Alachua County, where we plug in and bring IFAS Extension to life. Good afternoon, everybody. This is Dr. Taylor Clem with IFAS Extension in Alachua County. Today we have Dr. Savanna Barry joining us, and she's a regional specialized agent in coastal ecosystems based out of the Nature Coast Biological Station in Ceder Key, Florida.
Great. I'm really happy to be here. I've always wanted to be on a podcast, and this is my first one, so I'm super excited.
Excellent. Yeah, they're really fun to record. So today we're going to talk a little bit about what the Nature Coast Biological Station is and some of the research and cool things that you're doing. And luckily, I'm familiar with some of the research and a little bit of your background, but could you tell us a little bit about yourself? I mean, you're a regional specialized agent in coastal ecosystems, but that's a very broad term. So tell us a little bit about your background and how you're doing what you're doing now.
Sure. Yeah. So I am originally from Virginia, and I moved to Florida for graduate school. So I did my undergrad at UVA in biology, and then I came to graduate school and did a master's and PhD in fisheries and aquatic sciences with Tom Fraser at UF. And during that time, I worked a lot on seagrass ecology. And so I did work in the Caribbean, but most of my work actually focused on the Big Bend or the Nature Coast of Florida. And so pretty much seagrass has been my background before I got into this job, which anyone who's familiar with extension will know that makes you a generalist immediately. So now I work a lot more on things like citizen science, programs that allow people to get involved in doing science and helping scientists, and demonstration projects on various habitat restoration. And I'm sure we'll get into all of that. But my background is really pretty much basic ecology in seagrasses.
That's excellent. So I do have to ask, so you're from Virginia and you ended up with an interest in aquatic ecosystems. Was it, I'm assuming you're familiar with the Chesapeake Bay area then, because that's the only really connection I can make with just immediately with Virginia and water.
Yeah, right. So I am from a landlocked county in Virginia, but we visited the Chesapeake Bay and we ate lots of blue crabs and oysters growing up. And I really learned in high school actually about how the Chesapeake Bay was really a shell of its former glory. And that made me really upset because we Virginians are very proud, and I felt like that was something that had been robbed from us, and I wanted to make sure that didn't happen in other areas. And really my naive goal when I was young was to become part of saving the Chesapeake Bay, which of course now I'm down here in Florida. But that was the original impetus, yes, and that's an iconic estuary. It's, I believe, the largest estuary in the United States. So.
Yeah, I feel like we could probably have a full conversation on how the success stories of the Chesapeake Bay and the work that's been going on there over the past 30 years.
Yeah.
So that's excellent. I know because, when I think of aquatic systems, here in Florida, we have water all around the state. With the freshwater sources or saltwater, the coastal areas, and they all have a strong relationship with one another. And I know since this is kind of your forte, can you tell us a little bit about Florida's water resources, especially if we're thinking about seagrass areas or that Big Bend area, Nature Coast? Why is it so important to Florida?
Yeah, so one of the biggest lessons I had to learn coming from Virginia to Florida was that the geology is completely different in Florida than most of the rest of the United States. We have a limestone base to our state here in Florida, and in Virginia, it's mostly a granite bedrock. And so here in Florida, that means that because we have a more porous geology, it makes our water resources much more vulnerable over a much shorter period of time to the things that we humans do on the land. And because Florida is one of the most populous states, we've got lots of housing developments, we've got lots of farms and ag, we have just a lot of human activity, right? And a lot of paved surface and things like that that cause a lot of the pollutants that go along with everything that we do to be able to flow off into our surface waters, but also percolate through that limestone geology. And coastal ecosystems are unfortunately the end receiver. They're the last stop for all of those pollutants. So every step along the way, that water is gathering up more and more of that, unless we have natural systems in place to sort of absorb and capture those pollutants. So in systems that have been highly modified, which describes most of our state here, we have a lot of unadulterated pollutants just going straight out into our coastal ecosystems, which can cause reductions in light, which is the main driver of seagrass loss globally and also in Florida. And reductions in light come generally from algal blooms that are fueled by specifically nutrient pollution, but there can also be sediment pollution if we have a lot of development and loose sediments going out. That can create shading too by having more particles in the water. We call that turbidity, but yeah. Turbidity. So yeah.
That's one of the points that I always like to bring up with people is, especially so many people from Florida are transplants. I'm a transplant, you're a transplant. There's a lot of native Floridians, of course, but I always like to talk about our relationship with water. And I think you hit a key point that sometimes is missed, is that every Floridian, everybody is directly connected to water, no matter where you live. If you're in a watershed, a spring recharge area, but I feel like especially so with Floridians, because of exactly what you said. You're talking about the limestone, and there's that direct connection and link between developed areas or homeowners or whomever it is with the aquifer. And here in Alachua County, we have multiple sinks where the water, our surficial water, just goes straight into the aquifer. And
right.
That has a huge impact on water quality. And in a lot of cases, our coastal systems are the receiving end of a lot of those pollutants, and they're potentially in some cases higher quantities, or they're just it's more severe, I guess is a good way to put it.
Yeah, and a lot of other estuarine systems around the country, it's more of surface water runoff that's the concern. But here in Florida, we have to deal with both that and the groundwater pollution that can occur. And because Florida's geology is different from the rest of the country, I think you're exactly right that a lot of our transplants don't have that inherent knowledge about that. And that's really important to remember. And what's interesting about the Nature Coast where I'm based is we actually are sometimes called the Springs Coast, especially in the southern region. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's because we have a lot of high magnitude springs that feed directly into the coast through coastal rivers. So in a lot of inland springs, it's just sort of a spring, and maybe it flows into a freshwater river, but we have a lot of springs that flow directly out and create estuaries. And so all that groundwater pollution has a even more direct conduit to our area here especially the southern Nature Coast.
Mm-hmm. And I can see how, you're talking about plant material, and, we can benefit from having like the ecosystem services. So seagrass has a huge role to play that can help with maintaining that ecosystem. But if it ends up being impacted negatively through the algal blooms, or you're talking about turbidity in the water, we lose that value of that system, not only for water quality, but also the biodiversity and other flora and fauna that live within those systems.
Yeah, so seagrasses are really important. The estimates that are out there for Florida are that between 80 and 85% of our commercially and recreationally important species depend on seagrass for at least part of their life cycle. So that includes things like gag grouper that people love to fish for offshore, mm-hmm. that they may not connect directly with seagrass meadows, but it's also our spotted sea trout and redfish and some of our most valuable sport fish. And a lot of people do that for fun, or even some people depend on those fish for their living. Seagrass is an important part of the puzzle, but there's also oyster reefs and mm-hmm. marshes and other parts of the whole system that's all connected. As you said, Floridians are all connected with the water, but the water also connects all of those different habitats together.
Right. So like we isolate some of these habitats just for us to try to understand them, but in actuality, they're one big system that all benefit and work in cohesion with one another.
Yeah, that's right. And to give an example of that, marshes are that fringing area that are right at where the freshwater meets the salt, and they have a really important role to play in capturing some of those sediments that are coming out of the rivers and capturing some of those nutrients so that they don't just flow straight out into the marine waters where they can cause worse issues. So the marshes help out the seagrasses by improving water quality. And if you lose that buffer of marshes, then you're putting your seagrasses and other more marine, saltier resources at risk. So that's just
Oh,
an
wow.
example of the connectivity that occurs.
Mm-hmm. That's excellent. I think that's an important picture to paint because sometimes that's lost on, I mean, just in general, you try to think of what's that bigger system and how are they all interconnected? Because they are. And you did mention like the sport fishing. When we talk about water quality, a lot of it has to do with the environmental impacts of maintaining ecosystems. But, when we're talking about Florida's economy, so much of that is dependent off of fresh water, or at least, sorry, clean water, a high water quality, and so having healthy ecosystems. I don't know the number off the top of my head, but I just know that tourism, at least with regarding the sport fishermen, is rather significant within the state.
Yeah, and I think there have been new numbers released, but I know that a recent report was something around $7.5 billion annually that comes from saltwater fishing in the state, and that's
That's a lot.
yeah, I think it might be up to 9 billion in the most recent report. I don't quote me on that because I haven't had time to read it yet, but it's billions for sure.
I mean, that's significant. I mean, if we're talking about water quality, the environmental part of it is very, very important, but obviously we can see a huge economic impact as well.
Yeah, and I
Mhm.
mean, just to put some more numbers on it, there are more than 4,000 licensed saltwater fishing guides in Florida, and so that's already 4,000 jobs that we know are directly tied to that, and that's not counting any of the bait shops or any of the
Mhm.
marinas or boat service industries that then are created from all of those charter captains running their boats all the time.
Mhm.
So it's a huge multiplier and a lot of jobs directly dependent again on those fisheries, which, as you said, are linked to the water quality and the habitat quality.
Wow. And then, I mean, we can always speak to the public so much about like what are some of the best things that you love about Florida? And so many of the activities, especially the outdoor recreation activities, are directly tied to water quality. So, I mean, that's a significant number. That's really cool to point out. But I want to segue. I want to jump into. So we really talked about water, of course, and the importance of the coastal systems. But it, how do we tie this in? So you are you are a faculty member with the Nature Coast Biological Station in Cedar Key. So I'm jealous that you get to live and work in Cedar Key because that's one of the coolest towns. But tell us a little bit about like how does the Nature Coast Biological Station fit into all of this?
Yeah, so the Nature Coast Biological Station, or NCBS, that we
Mm-hmm.
can say for short, it's a yeah, it's a relatively new research and education center at the university. It was founded in 2015, and one of the reasons for that is because this region of Florida, the Nature Coast, which we roughly think of as between Anclote Key and the St. Marks River, has an extremely high dependence of jobs on natural resource quality. It's something like 13% of people in these counties depend on forestry, fisheries, and water-based activity to make up their livelihoods. And statewide, it's closer to 1 to 2%. So this
Mm-hmm.
is a huge area for natural resources and the natural resource economy in the state. And so there was an interest from IFAS to try to support that, environmental quality being sustained in this area. It's one of the last undeveloped regions in Florida. It's actually, I think, the least developed coastline in the continental United States.
Oh
I think
wow.
only Alaska has less developed coastlines than this area of Florida, which is remarkable. And so it's a really special system, and economically, it's an important system for the university to be focusing on. And so that's why it was founded. But IFAS actually has a really long history in the Nature Coast and in Cedar Key. Most people are familiar with Cedar Key clams.
Yeah.
And the clam industry here was supported in a very big way by IFAS and IFAS Extension. So and then also various water quality monitoring programs that have been going on for decades. And so the station was really a way to bring some more focus and cohesion to efforts that had been underway for a while, but give folks from main campus and other visiting researchers kind of a home base and a place to base more effort and research out of.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's significant. So, and can you tell us a little bit about, because I know there's that tie in with, IFAS extension and that role in trying to pull all those programs together, and the Sea Grant program is part of that as well. Can you tell us a little bit about that Sea Grant program?
Yeah, so Sea Grant is kind of a play on land grant. So if
Mm-hmm.
people know the history of extension, they know that, the universities were given a land grant and to focus on developing strategies and things for agriculture. But then later in the 19, I'm going to misspeak here. I think it was the 1970s because we
Mm-hmm.
just had our 50-year anniversary in Sea Grant. The federal government created the Sea Grant program. So we are responsible for doing coastal extension, similar to how the land grant program areas are responsible for doing extension in terrestrial systems. So initially it was focused a lot on commercial fisheries, but as the makeup of our coastal industries has shifted, there's been a lot of focus on recreational fisheries, tourism and sustainable tourism, and even citizen science and getting the public involved. And it really varies by state which Sea Grant programs focus on which audiences, but we're one of the biggest Sea Grant programs here in Florida because we have some of the most coastline.
Mm-hmm.
And there actually are also Sea Grant programs for the Great Lakes, even though it's not the ocean, but they do have a lot of coastline. So It's a great, great program.
That, I think that's, one of those things where we hear that term a lot, that Sea Grant. So I think that really kind of helps kind of paint that big picture for us. And so the biological station, the Sea Grant program, just had that 50-year anniversary, and IFAS has been working out there for a while. So what are some of like the big success stories that have come from NCBS since it was started doing some research or work out there?
Yeah, well, there are several that come to mind. I mean, we already mentioned the clam industry, which is probably the biggest one. It's something like a $50 million annual industry just in Ceder Key alone. So that's a big deal. But in 5 years, we've been able to accomplish a lot at the biological station. We've brought in a lot of grant funds to do pilot habitat restoration projects focused on things like propeller scarring and sustainable shoreline management, so marsh restoration, and with the goal of protecting property at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have some really cool demonstration projects out there that help managers design future projects and help people see what's possible sort of to mitigate some of the damage that's been done. Even though this isn't that developed of a coastline, we have a lot of shallow water and we do have some urban coastlines that need to be restored. And so showing people how that's done, I think we've done a great job right out of the gate of being able to do that. There have also been some really cool successes in terms of fisheries management. Mm-hmm. So I work a lot on habitats and plants, but other faculty at the station work on recreational fisheries questions and ecosystem modeling, and they sort of are looking at harvest rates and trying to help managers make better decisions or more informed decisions about, say, fish bag limits or size limits or things like that. And so we've had a few examples, horseshoe crabs and sea trout and even snook come to mind as species that the management agency in the state has directly consulted us on and partnered with us on research to make better decisions. So, changes in policy, they may not seem like a success to some people, but it is when
they're pretty significant.
When it leads to future sustainability. So that's all some cool stuff that we've been working on.
You mentioned something that I think is really important. You mentioned the citizen science, because when we talk about extension, it's not necessarily just doing research, but it's really how do we engage the public? How do we engage the public in outreach to really communicate, not only the research and science that's happening with UF, but what are those changes and how to get them involved? And when you mentioned citizen science, I kind of like, I want to talk about that. That's an interesting program. And I know that you have some citizen science projects going on right now.
Yeah, so citizen science is really perfect for extension because it allows us to engage our stakeholders and give them education and training, but also a way to contribute to some really longer term outcomes. So the horseshoe crab thing that I mentioned before about fisheries management, that actually came from citizen science data. So our biggest citizen science project is called Florida Horseshoe Crab Watch, and it was founded here in Ceder Key with collaboration from FWC and a faculty member in UF biology. But now it's a statewide program, and
Oh, that's
FWC
wonderful.
has a full-time staff member dedicated to this program, and people from all around the state are collecting data on nesting horseshoe crabs, and that data was directly used in a stock assessment for horseshoe crabs. And so we've heard from our volunteers that knowing that their data is going somewhere useful and important makes them feel like they want to participate at a higher level. It's not just for fun, like this is really
Right.
management quality data. Another example of that is the coastal lake watch sites that we have. We call it water watch since it's not the lake, but we have people out there collecting water samples monthly in these areas that are so rural, and DEP has limited resources, and so they can't cover all of the areas that need to be sampled. And because Lake Watch is such a well-established program, the data they collect can also inform management. It can be an early warning indicator if we're starting to see some of these problems that we know plague so many other areas of the state. And so, when I think about citizen science, I think that if you're going to ask people to give their time and volunteer their effort, the data they collect should be going somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a philosophical difference that some people don't share. Some people think that just having people go through the motions of science gives them more connection to it. And I do believe in that. But in extension, we're really supposed to be creating changes in our
Right.
communities. And so that's why I personally focus on management quality citizen science. But there are so many opportunities out there for people to participate in all kinds of citizen science. And I think all of it is great. But here at the station, we kind of, again, are always looking for ways we can partner with managers and try
Mm-hmm.
to help cover data gaps in this really important area of the state, but often overlooked.
I want to ask, if I want to ask more about some of your research, but say someone wants to get plugged in or wants to participate in some of the citizen science, like with the horseshoe crabs or water watch or lake watch. How can they do that?
So we have a website. If you just Google Nature Coast Biological Station, you can find our website, and our extension tab on the homepage will take you to various sections that I've been talking about. So we have information. Also, I don't know if you can make my contact information available to people in the description of the
Yeah,
recording.
absolutely.
But yeah, people can email me. We have a lot of opportunities for people. And sometimes also for our habitat restoration, we have volunteer events with marsh planting and things like that that are a little bit harder to predict. But the horseshoe crab watch is every fall and spring,
Hmm.
and the water sampling is monthly.
Yeah,
So those kinds of things are always available for people to be involved in.
excellent. Yeah, I've done some. I haven't done any of the horseshoe crab citizen science, but I have actually participated in like lake watch program
Right.
before, and that's actually a lot of fun. It kind of gives you an excuse to go out paddling or do something fun, and then you get to take some water samples. It's really easy to do. So I'd encourage anyone to try to plug in and try to do any of that citizen science that's happening around them. But with some of the other research that you all are doing, I know that you mentioned like the continual research with some of the fisheries. What are some of the other notable research that's happening at the research station or the biological station? Sorry, and that you would like to kind of highlight?
Yeah, so probably one of the main things that we haven't talked about much yet is the impacts of climate change and changes
Yeah.
in water and land use in the
Hmm.
Swanee Basin. And so Cedar Key is at this really interesting latitude in that it's a transitional zone for many species from tropical to temperate. And so we call
Hmm.
that an ecotone. So it's this transitional zone. And we've been seeing in this region of the state of increasing dominance of mangroves, which are
Hmm.
normally tropical species because they can't
Right.
tolerate freezing. And they have been coming more and more into this area. So we've had folks that have partnered with us with either intern projects or things like that to look at that, at the ecology of how that's going to change our system, or even just track and map that over time. Looking at changes in biogeochemistry between mangroves and marshes, because we really do think that this is going to be a continuing trend. Even if we do happen to get a hard freeze that knocks the mangroves back, we pretty much think they're here to stay because of the temperature trends we're seeing. But there are a lot of other species that come along with that. There are things like roseate spoonbills that are nesting here.
Wow.
And the wildlife refuge is mostly researching the sort of the changes in the bird populations. But a major project that has captured a lot of people's interest here has been studying the dynamics of the range expansion of the common snook, which is a really important sport fish, especially in South Florida. And traditionally, people didn't target them much north of Tampa Bay. But again, similar to mangroves in the last couple of decades, monitoring programs have been seeing snook more and more, even throughout the year, all size classes, which indicates they may be spawning here locally. And so we've had several projects here that have been led by our director and other faculty, looking at the genetics of the founding population to see if they differ from the Tampa Bay region, which we found that they do, or they found that they do. But then also, where are the snook going in the winter? Because the waters do get below their thermal tolerance in the winter. So there's some really cool tracking studies going on. And a lot of species use the groundwater, the springs, as thermal refuge, and snook are doing that. And so characterizing where they're going and overwintering in the Swanee River and stuff like that. So all of these ecological questions of how these range expanding species are interacting with our coastline and other members of the system are just sort of, that just gives you a flavor of some of the things that our folks are working on.
So are we seeing snook overwinter in some of those like first magnitude springs in the Swanee?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to give away too much because this is new research, but we are finding the folks that are working on this project, Charlie Martin and his postdoc Ashley McDonald and our director Mike Allen, they've tracked snook throughout the winter in this region. I'll just say that. I don't want to steal their punchline.
Right. That's strange. I mean that's all associated with climate change, warming waters, and they're moving with those mangroves. I mean, that all kind of goes back to, well, are they associated? Is that movement associated with mangroves at all, or is it just the warming water? Do you know offhand?
I actually don't know the answer to that. It's probably more of a tip, since both of those species are associated with temperatures. It's probably more so that, but actually snook are even more sensitive to temperature than mangroves. Their minimum temperature is, I think, somewhere around 50 degrees. I could be misspeaking, but whereas mangroves can tolerate down to freezing pretty well, even though it's not their optimal. But
right, that's interesting. That's a pretty big impact. I mean, I think that's kind of an indicator. You know, we see even in the inland part of the state, we're seeing shifting plants. You know, we're seeing changing ecosystems associated with the warming climate. And when I work with homeowners and they're talking about some of the plant material that they want to use, plants that we could have used here in Alachua County 30 years ago, we can't use anymore because they were right on that line of that southern temperate climate. And now we're just a little bit too warm and we're not getting the good cooler temperatures, and just the summers fry them. Some of those plants. So we're seeing just a lot of shifting plant material, but knowing that there's going to be a big environmental shift as well, you know, with mangroves and the fisheries, a lot of that, we don't know how that's going to impact. How, you know, mangroves can be very beneficial to the coastal systems, but does that end up displacing some of the other habitats? I guess that's all part of what we're trying to learn, is what that impact's going to be.
Yeah, there's a lot of research, not so much at the biological station here, but throughout the Gulf Basin on what this transition is going to mean. Are there going to be winners and losers, certain things that do better in mangroves and marshes? A lot of people tend to think of mangroves and marshes as just analogous. You know, one is a tropical fringing and the other is the temperate fringing habitat. But there actually are some meaningful differences in terms of soil properties and carbon quality that are produced, and the actual physical structure is different with the root systems versus the stems and all of that. So there's a very active area of research on what that's going to mean. And as these other new competitors like snook become more common, what is that going to mean for redfish that typically would be in similar habitats? And so all of that stuff is not known yet, but we do think there will be differences. And of course, mangroves are highly beneficial. They do a lot of the same functions as marshes. They're just maybe slightly shades of difference in how they perform those functions.
Wow. I think that's going to be really interesting things to learn, because I mean, with that changing environment, it's going to have a rippling effect on other things. We just trying to understand what that's going to be is, kind of up in the air, but I'm interested to hear more. So if someone wanted to come to NCBS, at least y'all are in Ceder Key. And when I tell people in Alachua County, or at least Gainesville, how do you get to the biological station? I say you go on Archer Road and you go straight. And when the road dead ends, you're there. But you all have programs. You all are set up in such a way where people can come visit you. And we brought 4-H summer camps there before. But if someone wanted to come to NCBS, they have the capacity to, correct? And what are some of those programs that you all offer to the community?
Yeah, so we have a lot of events, and right now, obviously, things are a little bit in turmoil and we're not under our normal operations. But typically, we have a public education center downstairs where we have native species aquarium where you can see freshwater, estuarine, and marine species, sort of in an aquarium setting. It's a very small room, but we've got a lot of information packed in there. And so that's pretty much always available when we are open to the public. And then we do various events, open house events, where we invite researchers that are doing work to come and have booths highlighting what they're doing. And that's typically annually in September. So keep an eye out for those events. We're actually going to be doing a virtual one this year just to make sure people still have that window into what we're doing. And as far as K through 12 or 4-H programs, those are mostly centered around the Seahorse Key Lab, which is a lab that's located 3 miles offshore on Seahorse Key, which is part of the Ceder Keys National Wildlife Refuge. And we do offer boat trips and other experiences out at that lab, and information about all of that is on our website. And you can make inquiries about availability. And it does book up quickly, but again, right now we're not under normal operations, but typically there would be tons of opportunities for people to come visit us and see what we're doing. And that's in addition to all of our extension programs and master naturalist classes and other citizen science trainings and volunteer events that we might have.
Yeah, I had a hard time when I was out there with the 4-H summer camp, because I'm supposed to help with all the 4-Hers, but I was way too involved. It's like we were looking at some of the fish, like dissecting them, and I was having too much fun. So I probably wasn't the best chaperone to be out there, but I do want to, the thinking about the biological station, it's a major resource. It's a center for research, for citizen outreach, and looking at how these coastal systems are going to change, because you were talking about how important the biological station is, or how important, that nature coast area is to Floridians. So I want to ask, where do we go from here? What's that big next step, with the biological station? What are we looking at in the future? How the station is going to have an important role?
Yeah, so I would say our major research priority for the future has to do with changing freshwater delivery to our coastline. And we just were selected, our director was the lead investigator on a grant from the National Academies of Science that just funded a 10-year effort to look at this. And we're really excited for this to start and get underway. But the basic gist of it is that estuaries are naturally dynamic. There are, ebbs and flows of how much saltwater, or how much freshwater rather, is delivered to that coast. But because of human modifications and also because of climate change, those changes are getting more dramatic. So we have examples all over Florida, like for example, in Apalachicola, we don't have enough freshwater being delivered, whereas down in South Florida, we often have too much freshwater being delivered to those estuaries. And so that can drastically alter the health of the estuarine systems. And here in the Nature Coast region, we've been seeing some concerning changes in the base flow levels of the Swanee River, and that they've been going down on average per rainfall. So even after accounting for differences in rainfall, we've been seeing that the delivery of freshwater to this area has been going down. And there have been some major oyster restoration. I won't get into it, but I encourage people to look up the Lone Cabbage Reef Restoration Project. That's a major priority that the biological station has recently taken a bigger role in. But in general, we need to understand how these variations in salinity that are caused by variations in freshwater are going to affect the health of our system, so that we can help determine those critical minimum flows and levels, or basically water levels that managers need to maintain to the coast in order to protect these vital resources. And with climate change, some areas are going to get rainier, some areas are going to get drier, and also we have to account for development and all of the extra water that more population. And so this project, that's again being led by our director here, is really holistic in that it looks at all aspects of the system and is going to try to help make predictions so we can better prepare to help prevent some of those really horrible impacts that we're seeing in other areas of the state and the country that haven't necessarily understood those dynamics as well.
So much of the research of what y'all are looking at isn't just going to be Nature Coast. It's going to be very extensive for pretty much a lot of Florida's coastal systems, and maybe even beyond that to a certain extent.
Yeah, a lot of the research we do, we try to connect that and make the applications broader to the region. And then also it's not just coastal, because when we're talking about the Swanee River, it goes all the way up into Georgia. And so it incorporates a lot of those terrestrial and freshwater processes as well as the coastal ones.
Yeah, and I think that's important, because that can bring us back to the very beginning of the discussion where we're talking about the importance of water. All Floridians, everybody's connected to water, and all Floridians are connected to water. And, talking about the Swanee River basin, that whole watershed area stretches up. The northern parts of it is the Okefenokee. And so a lot of that water comes down, and there's urbanizing areas in there. And that's going to have a huge impact on stream flow, like you mentioned. So decisions that are made as the crow flies, maybe even 100 miles away from the outflow of the Swanee River, has those impacts on what we're seeing. So I think that's a big important message to take, is this research isn't necessarily just the coastal systems. We're looking at coastal systems, but it relates to everything that's happening upstream.
That's right. And it has to be necessarily. And, some of the most important things that we can do in Florida aren't as fun to talk about as fish and plants and all the things we've been talking about. Things like stormwater management, low impact development, reclaimed water, development requirements, all of these kinds of things can really make a huge difference, because it all comes down to how much water and what's in the water that's flowing out to the coast. And everything we do on land impacts that. And we can be better. And there's lots of great technologies about how we can be better than the average development today in Florida.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it can be little decisions, like an individual decides to do a rain barrel or some type of cistern system to catch the stormwater runoff. So then they can try to let that flow percolate into the landscapes, or how they're managing their landscapes to help improve water quality rather than degrade it through bad management practices. But you can always go from those little decisions all the way up to what are those policy decisions that need to be made to help protect Florida's water quality and quantity, because again, it's all tied to environmental health, but also the success of Florida's economic future.
That's right. Yeah. And I agree. I think every little bit helps. I think some of those bigger policy things are needed for some of these big developments where there's a lot of money and a lot of decisions being made at a high level. But it is true, every homeowner, every little bit helps, especially if you're nearby one of these sinks, or if you're next to a spring area. Kings Bay comes to mind down in Citrus County. I mean, how you fertilize your lawn in Kings Bay can have direct impacts on the health of that bay. And so it may seem small, but it really does add up.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Savanna, I want to thank you very much for joining us today. And I do want to ask if you have like any last message that you would like to share related to the biological station.
I mean, I guess I would just say that we've got lots more to come, and we have a lot of exciting things. And I really hope that I'll be able to come back on this podcast and talk in a little bit more detail, or even maybe have another member of our faculty here join us for a conversation, because we really just scratched the surface.
Yeah.
And I hope that people in Gainesville will come and see us when we're open for business again.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's definitely piqued my interest, and my hope is that we will have you and others back on from NCBS, but I'll also use that as another excuse I'll bring all the recording equipment out to you all.
Okay, great.
So I can visit Ceder Key. So, but anyways, thank you very much for your time today, and we appreciate all the research and everything that you do with the citizen outreach, etc. So thank you very much.
Great to be here and chat with you, Taylor. Thanks so much.
Thank you.